to the Central Community College at Columbus and got an associate's in science. I knew that I wanted to go to a smaller school because I had come from a smaller high school, so that community college really fit with what I was wanting. And it was kind of close to home. So after a couple years there, I transferred to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln and got a degree in natural resources with an emphasis in fish and wildlife. And I also have a minor in environmental studies. So I know that's a mouthful, but you know, fresh out of high school, I kind of was like, what do I want to be when I grow up? I thought I was going to be a vet for the longest time until I found out that they had to go to school for 8 years. And as much as I love school, I didn't know if that was the best fit for me. And then my parents were like, hey, did you know that they have this degree in fisheries and wildlife? And you can do all this cool stuff. You can work with animals. You can be a conservation officer. You can teach people about wildlife. And so I was like, well, that sounds like a really cool major to go into. So while I was finishing up my degree, I came on as a temporary park worker at one of the coolest state parks. I'm a little biased, but Ponca State Park. So I came on as a temporary park worker as a naturalist. So in that setting, I wasn't quite out of college yet, but that helped me get my foot in the door with the state agency. And I was able to teach people different programs and different activities. And then from there, I was able to get on with a local nonprofit out here in Western Nebraska, Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, and manage their education programs out here before finally landing a job with Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. So that's just a little background about myself, kind of the path that I took. There are several people that kind of take different routes to get to where I'm at. Some people take more of an education-minded focus when they get their degree, and then they kind of fall into the wildlife side. And I took a weird turn and did the wildlife side and kind of fell into the education realm. So there's a little star on this map. This is where I work. Like Monica mentioned, I'm in Western Nebraska, and I cover several of the state parks that are out here, like Shadron State Park, Fort Robinson State Park, Wildcat Hills Nature Center, which is where my office is out of. And then I dabble a little bit with Lake McConaughey and Minotera a little bit as well. Not as much as Heidi, but I'm able to work with some great naturalists out here in Western Nebraska. So I'm over here. Lincoln is over here. So like Monica mentioned, a ways away, 6 to 7 hours on the other side of the state. So like I mentioned, my office is out of the Wildcat Hills Nature Center. We're a nature center with about 1,000 acres for hike, bike, horseback riding trails. We have a shooting sports complex out here as well. But the main focus that we have out here is for education programs. So we see nearly 1/3 of the kids in the Panhandle. They come out to the Nature Center for field trips, for classroom programs, different things like that. Like I mentioned, I started off as a temporary park worker. So this is me with a couple of my coworkers at Ponca State Park. This job really opened the door for me. I was able to get in and see what this career was about in a temporary setting. So I was on from about May to October and able to do all these really cool programs. So it changed daily. So like one day I could be teaching tomahawks and atlatls. And then the next day I'm teaching you a butterfly program or our fishing program. So it kind of varied. And that's where I kind of fell in love with presenting, especially our native animals. They have a bunch of cool education animals here, and you're able to teach people about their habitats, their adaptations, a lot of cool stuff about these animals. So that was really nice to kind of get in as a temporary, see if I liked the job, see if I could present to the public. And I'm a little bit more of an introvert sometimes. So this kind of got me outside of my bubble, outside of my shell, and kind of broke out to see if this was a career that I really wanted. So like I mentioned, this was a temporary job from May to October. The other job that I had from October to May was I was in a lab setting at the university. I worked with a professor that was looking at some tropical fish. Um, so I got to dabble in that a little bit and found out that maybe a lab setting wasn't my true calling. I was inside all the time. And while it was fun working with these aquatic animals, my passion really lied outside and outdoors. So like I mentioned, I worked for Game and Parks and then, as a temp park worker, and then I went on with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies and was able to lead some of their education programs that they do out here in Western Nebraska. One of them was an educational bird banding station. So I really liked the fact that I could take what scientists were doing, like capturing birds, and interpret or talk about that with the public, with school students, so they understood how science really worked and what some of the things they were doing and information that we were collecting. So that's me with a Steller's jay, which is kind of a unique bird out here in Western Nebraska. I actually left a meeting so I could go see this bird because this is a live bird for me, which means that, I had to see it. And then I also got to lead some different educator workshops. One of them that I thought was really cool was a herpetology workshop. So I got to work with some of our state's resource professionals in presenting different workshops. So one of them was on snakes. This is me with a Plains black-headed snake. It hadn't been captured in Nebraska for quite a while. And so that was really cool to find that and work with some different people and some scientists out there in the field. So I kind of went from a Bird Conservancy of the Rockies to Nebraska Game and Parks over 10 years ago is when I moved into my position at Wildcat Hills Nature Center. I get to do all sorts of things. So there's not really a typical day, which is kind of fun. So I might be leading a wildflower hike one day, or here's me teaching some kiddos about some macroinvertebrates at a different state park at Shadron State Park. I'm going to talk about water quality. Here is me teaching an outdoor cooking presentation. So like I said, there's no real typical day. You kind of get to choose what's popular with the public, but also what your interests are. Here we are teaching a fishing clinic. And so this girl had broken her line and we had to tie on a new hook. So teaching them, this is how you tie the palm or knot. Here's how you put the bobber on. Here's how you put the weight on. And so that's a lot of fun, empowering young people to do some outdoor related activities. And like I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of different stuff that I get to do. And this is actually me leading one of our preschool programs. So there's a whole variety of ages that I'm able to interact with. I love the littles. I also love teaching to adults. So there's a variety of people that you get to talk to in this position. This is me at the Shadron Fur Trade Days. So we had a booth set up. Families could walk by. We talked about some of the animal pelts that were out there and some of their cool adaptations. And I love the conversations that I have with our visitors and our guests that are at some of these events. It's always a lot of fun. Like I mentioned, out here in Western Nebraska and Wildcat Hills, I do a lot of field trips. And this is me leading a group of kids. We're on a nature hike in the Wildcat Hills, so you can kind of see what our terrain looks like a little bit. And it's always awesome to see the kids out here enjoying the outdoors. I led a group for a bunch of first graders. And the little first grader was like, oh, I've never been so out in nature before. And I'm like, oh, how do you like it? And she's like, this is awesome. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool that, I've got this student that's really excited about the outdoors. But part of me also was kind of like, oh man, she's in first grade and she's never really enjoyed being outdoors or gotten outside before. So that's why I think our job as an environmental educator, an outdoor education specialist is important, because we offer those opportunities for school students, for our public to get out there and enjoy your state parks. So while we're on the trail, we find lots of different things. This is, we're looking at a yucca moth and a yucca caterpillar. And they like to munch their way into yucca pods. So we're able to see some of that life cycle type stuff in our hikes, and we're able to talk about it and also connect it with what they're learning about in the classroom. One of my favorite programs, I know this picture is kind of hard and you're just seeing a bunch of red lights, but I, in some of our state parks, lead a bat program. So we talk about how cool these creatures are and how scientists collect this information and what we could do with this information. And it's just another aspect of tying some of the research that's being done with some of the biologists that are doing that research, and then tying it in with what these folks that are attending these programs can do to help bats or help a critter. So we're really wanting them to get encouraged and engaged and kind of, maybe possibly change their mindset. Maybe they've never experienced some of this stuff before. So along with our education programs, I also get to work on some other like special programs, stuff that's really interesting and unique. So I've helped design or come up with some different interpretive signs, trail signs. So this one is all about rattlesnakes that we have out here in Western Nebraska. That backpack is a sensory backpack. So if I have some friends that maybe are a little bit more fidgety or maybe need something to keep their hands busy, folks can check that out and utilize that. So I get to develop that out here. And then one of the other projects that I've been working on is our Junior Explorer booklet. So it's similar to a Junior Ranger program, but only in our state park system. So I got to develop that for the Wildcat Hills. And then our second edition is going to be for Chadron State Park, because our park system is celebrating its 100th anniversary. So that's another great big celebration for our state park system that I'm thrilled to be a part of. I also got to do some different plantings. So this is a pollinator garden that's right outside of our nature center. And before this pollinator garden, I really hadn't noticed much for monarchs because we don't have many monarchs out here as much as the eastern side of the state. But when you build it, they will come. And after about a year of this planting being in there, we're able to see some monarch caterpillars in here. So that was really neat to see that we are making an effect on the landscape and some of the populations of some species as well. So those were just a few pictures that I wanted to show you about my job out here and how it varies and how it's a little bit different. So I wanted to know what questions you might have, or maybe Monica's got some questions that people have wrote into her about how cool this job is, and maybe some specifics that you were wanting to know about it.
Yeah, so if anyone, we can certainly open it up first. Otherwise, I do have some questions that people have sent in because I couldn't unfortunately attend today. But does anyone in the audience have any questions for Amanda?
I do, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm a sophomore at Wahoo High School, and I'm actually at school right now. And I was wondering what the most rewarding part of your job is.
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm gonna try to say it without getting all teared up, okay? I love making an impact and getting people outdoors and involved in nature. And so I love those light bulb moments when you're taking somebody out and you can see it clicking and you can see that they're understanding what you're telling them, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing and this is so cool. So I really like those moments. In that, I'm making an impact. We're making, the resource be known to folks, and maybe shedding some light on some creatures that maybe people don't appreciate as much, like snakes. But that's one of my most rewarding parts of the job. So good question. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I have one. Amanda, first, thanks for coming on and talking to us all. This is awesome. I'm kind of curious about your process for developing curriculum. So you spoke a bit about the materials that you put together for kids. How do you guys decide what you're creating? Is there a body of people who are involved in creating that? Does Nebraska make all of its own, or do you guys kind of borrow from national programs? I'm curious about the curriculum that you develop.
Yeah, good question. So the question was about the curriculum that's developed. It's kind of twofold. I'm going to be honest with you. We do some school type programs, some environmental ed programs. And a lot of those times we're trying to tie into our state standards, or especially state science standards. And so making sure that the programs that I offer for field trips can take what the students are learning about in the classroom and they can see it in real world application. So when they take a hike out here, we can talk about erosion. So they're not just seeing a picture of it in the classroom, but they're actually seeing it in the buttes and the bluffs that we have out here. So that's one thing that I tried to do. The other thing that I try to do is we do more public programs, so interpretive programs with our park visitors and our park guests. And a lot of times it's what the naturalist maybe has a passion for, and then where it might tie in really well with what our visitors want to see. So like if I have a temporary naturalist that is terrified of snakes, they're not going to do a good job presenting a snake program to the public. So maybe they can focus on something that they have a passion for or are excited to teach about. So that's kind of twofold. In the education world, we do share materials, and you just have to give credit where credit is due. So if I borrow something from, say, the National Park Service that's listed online, I might tweak it a little bit to help fit my area a little bit better. But I'm going to let them know that this material came from this area or this park or something like that. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. It's a big one. Sorry to drop that on you.
No, and a lot of times, especially like we're working on the park centennial, we did a couple lesson plans there. I'll send them past some of my other educators in the field. So I know that in our agency, we have a couple environmental or outdoor education specialists. So I'll send it to them and be like, hey, can you look this over? Can you see if there's anything that maybe I need to change or adapt? And so it's a real team effort, I feel, with some coming up with some of these educational programs. Just what works, what doesn't, do I need to adapt it the next time I teach it? That's a lot of evaluation as you're going into the field and presenting it. I also feel like happens as well. So.
All right, good question. One that did kind of come in on the chat is, how does someone get involved? Like if they want to be an environmental educator someday, what would be your best advice, Amanda, for them to get into this field? If a lot of you don't know, there's not a ton of environmental education positions in Nebraska or in fact in the United States. So they're very kind of few and far between. So what would you say would be the best advice to give someone if they really wanted to go into this field? How do they start?
Yeah, I would say either volunteering or seeing if you can get a temp job in the field. A lot of times, like Monica said, it's competitive, right? So I don't have my master's like some of the other people in the field. So that might be something you may need to look into, is if you want a master's in environmental education or interpretation or something along those lines. Is if you don't have your master's, then they go with years of experience. So our state park system here in Nebraska has a lot of great opportunity to be an environmental educator in our naturalist program. So developing those programs, working with the park superintendent. There are also some nonprofits that are in the area as well that you can get your foot in the door, maybe helping with some education programs. It's just, like I said, getting your foot in the door and letting them try it out, see if you like it, see if it's something that you're interested in as well. So yeah, there's volunteering opportunities. You're always welcome to come in and help with a program. We have some forms to fill out in the Parks Division, and you just come in and you can watch or help an educator with a different program. And then we have a lot of events and different things like that in a normal year, of course, not during COVID, that folks are able to get involved with as well. So there's a lot of opportunities to get out there, just to either volunteer or, like I said, get paid as a temporary park worker. I will tell you in this field that you do it because you have a passion for teaching people or a passion for the outdoors. So a lot of the time, the paycheck might not be as high as other career fields, is what I'm telling you. So your average looking at a salary for a year is like 30 to 50,000, which you're not going to become a millionaire doing that. But if you really love what you do and are passionate about it, I think that speaks volumes over the paycheck. So that's a really good question.
Another question that also came in from someone that wasn't here today. When you look to hire someone, Amanda, you hire some temporary positions at Wildcat Hills. What do you really look for? What really impresses you if you go to hire someone in the field?
Yeah, so I want to look at if they've had any experience like talking to people. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to have presented an education program before, but maybe they volunteered at their local library to lead an education program or to read books to preschoolers. Maybe they were like heavily involved in an organization at their school, like National Honor Society or something along those lines. So I'm looking for people that are excited to talk to people is another thing that I look for, because in this field you kind of have to be a little outgoing. Also like 4-H and FFA, I know like that requires some dedication on completing some projects and other things like that. So that's what I'm kind of looking for. And also to see their hobbies. You know, a lot of times people will put, I like to go hiking, or I like to go kayaking, or I like to go canoeing. So I know that they like to be outside. So that also helps. And maybe if they've had any experience with public speaking, that also helps as well. So there's no one candidate that I'm like, oh, they have to check all these boxes, but the right candidate's going to have a combination of a lot of different aspects or different things that might be important for this job.
All right. One other question. Clearly COVID has changed your position a little bit. You haven't been able to probably be face-to-face education a lot with a lot of people. So how has that changed your job? Does it change what you do, or do you do things virtually now? How has that kind of changed? And do you think those changes will be something that might be permanent, or what do you think?
Yeah, good question. So with COVID, we've had to pivot. Okay. So a lot of our programs that we typically do face-to-face or in person have now gone online, which is great because we're able to accommodate a more widespread audience. So I'm able to take the programs that would have only been offered at Wildcat Hills and take them statewide. So that's a positive. That's the way I'm going to look at it. I don't know if it's going to be around to stay. It'll be interesting to see when COVID's kind of over and done, if we stick with a virtual world. But I'm super excited to get out there and interact with people. Like I mentioned, I'm kind of an introvert. So doing programs, I didn't know that I would miss it as much as I do. Like I'm doing a lot more planning, a lot more programming, behind the scenes work. Which is typical during the winter time in this position, but we haven't ever had that springtime kick where I can get out there and do field trips all day, every day for a month and a half solid. So it'll be interesting to see what changes happen during COVID, but yeah, a lot of the educators in the state have had to kind of change or adapt the programs that we're doing.
And that's good, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to have this today. This was brought on because of COVID and making sure that people know that there's all these different careers here at Game and Parks. And again, not like I said, not just at Game and Parks, but just in that wildlife outdoor field. A lot of reasons why we started this is because I know a lot of people, and Amanda even mentioned this, that you grow up, you like outside, you like animals, and a lot of people automatically just assume you should be a vet, or that's kind of the only thing out there. And I know that when I was in school, that's what I kept hearing too. So I went into vet science, and like Amanda said, you're in school for a long time, and not everyone that goes into that is going to become a vet. So there's a lot of things that we don't even know about this outdoor world. And I never knew an environmental educator existed at all, let alone what did they do. So I'm hoping that helps some of you understanding that there's more out there than you like animals. You could be a vet or a biologist. There's a lot of different things that help with conservation and aid in conservation. It's not just those biologists or a fisheries biologist or a bear biologist or anything like that. So there's a lot of other cool positions out there that that help conservation and do just as much good as being a bear biologist or something like that. So
Right. And then I think what's really important is this field is continuing to grow, right? So in Nebraska, a few years ago, we only had like one or two, right? Environmental educators or outdoor education specialists. And then we're slowly growing. And like I said at the beginning, environmental educators, we're going to take over the world someday, right? And so we want a lot of people to know about this cool career and what you can do and what you can show and tell people about the outdoors and about wildlife and how you can like help facilitate their experiences. So that's one thing that I really enjoy is that we're growing and we're hopefully, like I said, going to take over the world.
all right, does anyone have any other questions? Otherwise, we just kind of have a few things I'll let you know about our next one, and then where you can find these videos if you wanted to share them with your class or with someone else, or if you wanted to go watch it again if you had a question. But does anyone else have any other questions before we kind of sign off?
I had one more question before I have to like head back to class,
Yeah.
So like a teenager like me, like how could like we get involved? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So anytime that you can get out there and start like presenting to people, like maybe your local library, right? Or you have a Bible camp or a church camp or a 4-H camp or something. That's how I kind of got interested in it as well. Like before I came on as a temporary park worker with Game of Parks, I was a staff member at our state 4-H camp because I knew I liked engaging with kids and involved with students and telling them about some really neat stuff. So yeah, starting to network, getting your name out there. If you want to volunteer in a state park or in another educational aspect or something like that, that would be something that I recommend as well. Just getting out there, getting your foot in the door, and letting people know that you're interested in this field, and maybe researching a little bit, like maybe some classes that you might take while you're still in high school might be some more science classes. I love science, by the way. I was such a science nerd. But I think that helped me understand some of the processes that I talk about, especially with school students. Math is also important. Math and I don't see eye to eye, but you do need it in the real world. And then ones that I wish that I would have taken were more public speaking type programs and classes like that, because that will help you in your career, no matter what career you go into, but how to present to people and how to talk to people, it'll help you along the way as well. So yeah, just getting your foot in the door, just getting out there, networking with people, talking with some maybe nonprofits that are in your area, or presenting some different programs along those lines would help you in this type of career. So good question.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I want to thank you for this like whole thing. It was really helpful, but I gotta go back to class. So
Okay.
yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes.
And
yes, and Heidi mentioned the Nebraska Master Naturalist. So that's another formal program that folks can go into. I don't know that Heidi, do you happen to know off the top of your head, is there like a minimum age requirement for a Master Naturalist?
Not that I'm aware of. I know they're talking about doing a junior Master Naturalist program, and hopefully I'll hear more about that at the board meeting on Friday. So
yeah,
so they've been talking about it. I don't really know any details. So
okay, cool. So the Master Naturalist program offers like professional development and some different things. They help out with different programming. They get connected with all the programs going on in the state and where we need volunteers and helpers in that as well. I will tell you that NACE is another great one. So Nebraska Alliance for Conservation and Environmental Education is another great resource. Thanks for putting that in the chat there, Monica. And folks, can look up that. There's lots of different connections as well. Heidi said it has to be at least 19 for Minnesota's program.
No, Master
So,
Naturalist, sorry.
Master Naturalist. I put Minnesota. I just saw that. The acronym.
I gotta
I went
remember
right
that
for the
that's
state.
usually what that means.
I went right for the state.
my own.
So, but so that's in there as well. So you can connect with that website. Thanks for adding that into the chat, Monica. And folks can go on there and kind of connect with that and see what's available and what's out there and different ways that you can get connected into this awesome career that we have.
And one thing that I do want to add to is even though we're in an environmental education world, there is a very small degree of knowledge of people knowing each other. So even if you don't want to get a job in Nebraska and you want to be an environmental educator in Washington or something, I guarantee that someone from Nebraska knows someone in Washington in some nonprofit area, or you're a biologist and you know someone in Florida. There's a very small degree of people, of separation between people. So it seems like it's this huge world, and it absolutely is, but they're fairly interconnected with all of our outdoor world jobs. And so knowing one person can help you get a job in another state, or can help you get a job at a nonprofit versus a state agency or something like that. There's a lot of people know each other very closely, more than you think. So that's always helpful too.
It is. And it's a lot of times it's not what you know, it's who you know that gets you connected into the job. So while I was at Ponca State Park as a temporary naturalist, I was able to connect with different biologists. I was able to connect with some different educators in the field. So they got to know me, and I'm not saying that didn't help me, but that helped me get my foot in the door and connected to my grant funded position with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, because I had worked with one of the supervisors for that position while I was at Game of Parks in that temporary setting. So it just gets you out there, gets you involved, trying different things. So yeah, any way that you can get out there and just see if you like the position. Sometimes it's not for everyone, but if you find a love for it, you'll really take this career and go pretty far with it.
All right. Does anyone have any other questions before we let Amanda go? Or Amanda, do you have anything else that you wanted to add before we sign off? Or
Matt, did you have another question? I saw you unmuted, so.
Yeah, thank you. You talked a little bit about the growth, and I'd like you to elaborate on that a little bit. The programs, obviously this year has been, an anomaly, but were you finding that your educational programs, what were the numbers like? I guess the best way to put it, like, were you guys under capacity, over capacity for these programs? Do you have a larger capacity and you'd like to engage more people? Where are you guys in the numbers game, I guess?
Yeah, so I'd always want to engage more people, but sometimes I can only be at one place, you know what I mean? So, and I cover the whole panhandle. And so what's been really nice is that growth is we're able to bring on a temporary park worker at Lake McConaughey. So Heidi was at Lake McConaughey. We're doing to outreach a little bit more and do programming there. We're able to hire a temporary naturalist here at Wildcat Hills. So we're able to kind of spread out and do more programming that way. So I think there's always potential to do more programming, but a lot of time it's resources that are limiting us, like staff members or, facilities at some parks or some locations. So I think it's a fine line, but I think, like I said, we're continuing to see this grow in the state, especially within Game and Parks, and take it to different parks that maybe haven't had that resource before. So I can't attest to exact numbers at all of the state parks or all the state areas, but I know that we're seeing that trend when we have an educator at a state park. Guess what? We're doing more education programs and we're able to reach more people. And so I think we're seeing that trend, and we're seeing more educators kind of come on board across the state, and several, at least in my opinion, in the state park system. Anyway, I can attest to that. So did that kind of answer your question a little bit?
No, yeah, that's fantastic. And if you don't mind, I have a follow-up from that, because I guess that's kind of what I expected, it seems. So your method of expansion is right now kind of limited to temp workers because of the finances that you receive from the state. Do you see, is there any push? I mean, from your perspective, is there support at the state level for expanding these programs? I mean, that's kind of the issue, right? We want to expand and more people need to know about these things and these availabilities, but there's very little financial resources to hire another full-time, program designer, and hiring temp workers. And none of this is the fault of you guys, obviously, but hiring temp workers seems to be like not really much of a commitment at the state level, which is frustrating. And it probably frustrates you guys all the time. Is there a push to expand that funding? Is there mechanisms to expand that funding? Are you guys fighting for that? Where do you guys stand? I know it's probably different across organizations.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Now, you're asking me a question that's above my pay grade. I'm going to let you know that. But from what I'm seeing, at least at my level, is there's a lot of support within our parks division. Our division administrator really supports us in our educational goals. However, it is hard to create a brand new full-time position. And that's having to be created through several different avenues. And so we're able to get our educational goals done through those temporary park workers. We're able to offer 11-month positions instead of just 5-month positions or 6-month positions. So we're continuing to see it kind of grow a little bit. Is there the possibility of having permanent position? Possibly within, future years. I don't know what years, but I see it growing to that, at least on my side. Because like I said, there's heavy support within the agency. We have a fish and wildlife education division now. So I see the support there within our agency. It just is, it's going to take us a little while to get maybe to our end goal. Monica, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm also an environmental educator on the eastern side of the state. And it's kind of funny because Amanda and I have pretty much the same position, but she's in the parks division. And like she said, I'm in the fish and wildlife education division. So this is a fairly new position or new division. We have 6 of us in this division now, and parks division has like over hundreds of people. So we are strictly devoted to ecological education. And I would say that in the past 8 years that I've been at Game and Parks, it has grown a lot. It was kind of something of a very big dream that I would even have a permanent position. And then I got a permanent position, and all of a sudden there's talk of a whole education division, and then kind of all of a sudden it happened. So there's a lot of support for education within our agency. But like Amanda said, it's just those finances, it's finding, it takes a lot at a state level to get anything done. And so getting a new position is hard, but it's definitely not unreachable, and it's not it's not a pipe dream anymore. We just added a new position she started a few weeks ago actually, and it's a citizen science or a community science coordinator position. And that was always this huge, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. And all of a sudden it's here. So there's a ton of support with education, especially with our director of Game and Parks. And like Amanda said, those division administrators too. So it's coming. It's just kind of a slow growth at this point.
And I think our commissioners also support that. So, and that was voted in on. We have a couple commissioners that just came on the board that really support education. So that's nice to see. And like Monica mentioned, we're getting there. It's just, we'll get there. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna take over the world. We'll get there. This might take us a little time to see it through, but yeah, there is that support. So that's a really good question, man. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, does anyone have any other questions? I don't want to cut anyone off. These are all really good questions and good discussions for Amanda. So thank you for joining us. I'm sure Amanda might stay on maybe a couple more minutes if you guys have any other questions. But I will kind of wrap this up. We do have another career conservation chat February 17th. It's the 3rd Wednesday of the month. Next month we will have a zoologist, so our state agency zoologist Sean Dunn, who is also on this call today, so he'll be joining us next week. He's going to talk about his job. He does a lot of things with small mammals, our reptiles, amphibians, bats. He's kind of our go-to person, kind of, we call him our catch-all person. He's a big bug person as well, so if you are interested in bugs, he is the person to talk to. So he'll be joining us next week or next month, sorry. And then if you have someone that would be interested in watching this, or a class that would be interested in watching this, we will have recorded this and we will put it on our Game and Parks Education YouTube channel. So probably give us till the end of the week to get it up, but we will get it up for other people to view as well. So, and I'm sure, Amanda, if you have any other questions, would you feel free maybe to put your email in there if someone would have a question for you that would like to just email you directly or talk to you if you're comfortable with that. That might be helpful as well. So, all right, she'll put her email in the chat there. Otherwise, thank you, Amanda, for doing this. Thank you very much. So,
Thank you.
Say hi. I am Rich.